Hello. This all happened to me a few months ago. I just need to share it with somebody. It all started at my friend's party. He was an artist who rented out a loft in the industrial part of town. If you could picture what the place like Detroit looked like in the 1920s, that's what the area looks like. A bunch of old turn out of the century factories crammed into 10 blocks. Most of them are abandoned. So I partied a little too hard that night and decided to crash on the couch at the loft. I woke up around 4 a.m. The sun wasn't out yet, but you could still make things out as the dim blue light. I went to the bathroom, carefully tiptoeing around the people that were passed out on the floor. As I was taking a piss, I looked out the bathroom window and saw a panorama of a deserted urban decay. I remembered how much I liked places like this. It was so dark and devoid of life, and strangely serene. I went back to the couch and tried to fall asleep. After 45 minutes of staring at the ceiling, I decided that I didn't want to be there any longer. So I swallowed up my pride and decided to wake my girlfriend up and beg her for a ride, since walking around the vacant streets at this time was not an option. Being an awesome girlfriend, she was totally cool with it. She told me that she would be there in about a half an hour, and that she'd give me a call when she was outside. My phone died 10 minutes later, so I decided that I would sit by the window and watch for her car. I sat there for a while. Eventually my eyes started to get heavy, and I began to doze off. A crashing noise outside woke me up. It wasn't loud, but enough to snap me back into reality. I looked out the window and scanned the area, but didn't see anything. However, across the street from the loft, near a mountain of garbage bags and one of the enormous dumpsters, I did see a computer and a monitor smashed against the floor that hadn't been there before. When my girlfriend arrived, I went downstairs and greeted her. Just as I was about to get in the car, I remembered a friend of mine who had blown out his power supply, so I decided to walk over to the dumpster and see what I could salvage. The monitor was worthless, but the tower seemed to have suffered almost no damage, so I put it in the trunk and we drove off. About a week had passed and I completely forgot all about the tower, until my girlfriend called and let me know that it was still in the trunk, and that she wanted it out. That night I brought it to home. Before I took it apart, I decided to hook it up to my monitor to see if it still worked, and to my surprise it did. It ran Windows XP, and it looked like it had been wiped clean. So I decided to do some searches for words like tits and etc., in hopes of trying to find some secret stash full of weird deviant porn on the previous owner had probably forgotten about. Morbid curiosity, I guess. But I came up with nothing. There were no picture files. When I searched for movies and one came up, it was an .avi file inside a folder titled Barbie, hidden in Windows System 32 directory. So I played it. This is where it gets disturbing. The movie was about an hour long, and it was made up of what seemed to be like raw exported footage. The footage was of a woman sitting on a chair, talking against a white backdrop. I skipped through most of the movie, and it was all the same continuous shot. I decided to sift through the footage to find out what she was talking about. 15 seconds into it, the audio became extremely bad, and her voice was drowned in harsh, static background noise. I didn't make out of a thing. I imported the footage into the Final Cut and tried to mess with the levels to isolate her voice. It helped a little, but I still couldn't hear what she was saying. I was intrigued now, and began to really pay attention to her and body language. It seemed that she was being asked questions, because she stopped at times to listen and then continued talking. About 15 minutes into the footage, her face began to redden and contort, as if the questions were bothering her, but she continued to answer them anyway. Shortly after, she started to cry. She sobbed hysterically for the duration of the film. One of the few words she could lip read was skin. She repeated this word many times throughout the footage, and at one point she even pulled out at the skin of her arm and mouthed out the word. She seemed to be unhappy with it. It kept on building, and about 40 minutes in, she was crying so hard that she could barely look at the camera. She stopped talking at this point, and the rest of the footage was just her crying with her head down. Oddly enough, she didn't get up or move. The screen just faded to black. I was fucking dumbfounded. I played the whole thing through many times that night, trying to find the inflections and nuisances in her movement that would reveal anything else about what was going on. I felt dissatisfied. I wanted to know more. That was when I noticed that the area were about 10 minutes left on this timeline before the after screen went black. 2 minutes passed in the darkness and there was more footage. The footage was extremely shaky, almost unwatchable, and depicted a pair of two legs walking along the train tracks. My guess is that the camera was accidentally left as if it was being carried somewhere. The person in the video walked along the tracks for about 6 minutes, and then turned to the forest and walked over what looked like a foliage flattened by a piece of plywood. This person continued on this makeshift plywood road until a clip ended. My heart started beating with excitement, because there were train tracks a few miles away that looked very similar to the ones in the video. I had to check this out. I called up my friend Isra. He's about 6'4", 250 pounds, of mostly muscle. I convinced him to go on a little venture with me. I'm no pushover myself, but if I was to go wandering in the woods looking for God knows what, some extra muscle wouldn't hurt. The whole idea of investigating this video had me excited and I couldn't sleep. The next morning on a sunny Saturday, I took my flashlight camera and 7-inch K-bar knife with the metal black finish and serrated edge and went to pick up Reza. When I got to his house, he wasn't even awake. When I woke him up, he pretty much told me to fuck off. I was already packed and mentally prepared myself to do this, so I decided to go through with it without him. I parked my car at the train station and took my stuff and hopped onto the tracks. After walking for about 2 hours, I saw a broken piece of plywood and my knees almost buckled with excitement. I searched the nearby foliage and there it was, little plywood trail leading off into the forest. I walked slowly along the trail, paying close attention to everything. I would stop occasionally and kneel down and listen for anything or anyone, but it was so quiet. This one was one of the most nerve-wracking things I've ever done. I didn't even know what to expect at the end of this trail. The dense tree line gave away the little island of grassy field, and then I saw it, a house being consumed by the forest, and from the looks of it, no one had lived there for 20, maybe 30 years. I got my camera and snapped a few pics. A few yards away from the house was a tool shed made out of a rusty metal sheet. I sat there among the trees for a while, absorbing everything. I didn't want to go into the open field. I had a bad feeling that something would see me. It took me a while to muster the courage to go up the house. The door was partly opened. I pushed it in with a flashlight and was relieved that inside was actually very well lit. I put the flashlight away and got my camera and took a few pics. There were no furniture. The floor was riddled with bricks, wood, and other rubble, and some of the walls had huge holes in them. And I went further to explore. I saw some things that I didn't pay much attention to mind at the moment, but now that I think about them in hindsight, they greatly disturbed me. The first thing that seemed a little odd was the one of the doors in the first room that I presumed to lead to the basement seemed a little too new to be in this house. It was also the only door that was locked. Also, when I made my way up the second floor, I saw some chairs and folded up table that also seemed a little too new to be there. But what disturbed me the most was the bathroom. The dust on the mirror had been wiped away, and the bathtub, I saw a clear plastic tarp that still had water droplets from it, when I presume it was the washed clean. That was when I heard something moan really loud. I jumped the fuck out of the second-story window and ran back to the tracks. Halfway there, I realized the moaning was most likely a water pipe expanding or contracting, and that moment of grief gave way to horror when I noticed why there would be water running in the abandoned house in the middle of the fucking woods. It's been a little more than 2 months since this happened, and I hadn't gone back there, nor do I plan to.